Hello, welcome to Chapter 13, The Impending Crisis. Okay, just to help you get a sense of where we're at, because this is kind of a second set of forgettable presidents here. If you remember last time, I think we really talked presidents was William Henry Harrison, 1840, defeating Martin Van Buren, that ending Jacksonian democracy. Harrison dies within the first month. John Tyler takes over. Nobody really likes Tyler. Then we get to Polk, who is really the expansionist. Then after that, we have war hero Zachary Taylor, and then Pierce. And at this point, we're ramping up towards the Civil War. Neither Taylor nor Pierce or Buchanan really can slow it down, or they don't do anything about it really. And then it's Abraham Lincoln, whose election helps really kind of tip towards the Civil War. Okay, so looking westward, the chapter is about our expansion, and really that expansion and some of that coming through the Mexican-American War, leading to sectional debate. That's kind of your overarching framework for this unit, or for this chapter. Okay, so the first question is this idea of manifest destiny. Okay, that Americans believe we're God's chosen people. We're destined to create this empire of liberty and spread across the continent. Okay. And what that really meant was that we're spared Native Americans. There really was no consideration of Native Americans. It was really just about us. Okay. There were people that were opposed to territorial expansion, though. And first and foremost is probably the issue of slavery. If you remember back in 1820, when Missouri applied to be a state, there's a lot of concern that it would throw the balance of states out of whack. And they were able to compromise back then with bringing Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. But the question is, if we keep on growing, then how would we work that out? And that's really one of the takeaways here. If we never grew as a country, so we stop adding states and stop adding territory, we might just learn to live with slavery. But because we are growing, that will force the issue. Okay, this is a famous painting of manifest destiny, this idea that we're ordained by God, led by this giant angel, chasing away the darkness and chasing away Native Americans, leading technology. Here's the trains, here's the telegraph. Looks like she's stringing the wire, like she works for AT&T or something like that, bringing progress. And that's kind of the mindset of the folks. Okay, so looking westward, there's tension between the U.S. and Mexico. And so what happened is Mexico wanted people to come to Texas, so they invite Americans to come in. However, when they invite Americans to come in, there's problems. One, there's questions of loyalty. So are they Americans, or are they loyal to Mexico? Two, there's a difference of religion. So the settlers tend to be Protestant while the Mexicans are Catholics. And three, the Americans bring their slaves with them. Okay, Texas is a big cotton producing area. For all you college football fans, the Cotton Bowl is down in Dallas, Texas. And so Mexico actually banned slavery, and what the Americans do is they just sign their slaves to 99-year contracts. Okay, so there's this growing tension between Texas and Mexico. Meanwhile, up in Oregon, we had joint custody of Oregon territory with Great Britain. This was one of the things that was agreed upon, I think, after the War of 1812. We do away with the Indians up there, mostly by disease. But we had joint sharing after the 1818 convention. Okay, so there's America and Great Britain controls that area, but more Americans are beginning to come up there. Okay, so what you get a lot of westward migration. If you guys remember the game in elementary school, Oregon Trail. And so people move west for the same reason that people move west all this time. So they want opportunities, and they want to start a new life, find more land to settle on. Typically, the people that are moving west at this time, they tend to be young families, and it's a difficult journey. It's 5 to 6 months. You got to go through the desert, you got to do mountains, deal with Native Americans along the way, and it's a collective experience. So really, did they go by themselves, but it would go as a small group. Oh, and that's life on the Oregon Trail. Sorry, forgot to click that. Okay, so pictures of the trails moving westward. Okay, so what you get with expansion is you get James Polk. Okay, so Polk is running for president, and he is an expansionist, and he, just to make sure that people don't misunderstand his aims, he promises to be one-term president, and actually he is. He keeps his promise, but he does run on this platform of expansion, and so the slogan that he had was "Re-annex Texas," implying that Texas belonged to us and we should take it back. Re-annex Oregon, 54-40 or fight, that we should take the whole Oregon territory for ourselves. Okay. And so what happens is we are we are pouring into the Oregon territory, the Willamette Valley. And remember our status with Great Britain. We are BFFs, and we really don't want to get in a fight with Great Britain, in particular because things are starting to get tense with Mexico. Okay, so we actually settle the Oregon territory along the 49th parallel. And what happens is that Polk wins. And so before he becomes president, John Tyler, who's still president, takes Polk's victory as a mandate for annexing Texas. Okay, and everything's fine. Actually, Americans are for it. And then what happens is I think it's Secretary of State Nicholas Upshur, he dies in some military demonstration. I think the cannon explodes, kills him, and Tyler appoints John C. Calhoun from the nullification crisis, that John C. Calhoun, Secretary of State. Now, all of a sudden, taking Texas looks like a slave conspiracy, like a conspiracy to expand slavery. The Northerners balk at it. They can't get it done. The only way they annex Texas is actually through joint resolution of Congress. Joint resolution of Congress. Okay, so what happens between U.S., Texas, and Mexico, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So Texas had actually, sorry, I usually have a drawing here, but I don't have my pens available. So usually Texas won its independence from Mexico first. Okay, and so Texas, after broke up, I think like this is like High School Musical. After Texas broke up with Mexico, she wanted to join the U.S. But both Jackson and Van Buren turned down Texas because Texas would upset the balance of states. So they rejected Texas. Okay, and Texas feeling kind of spurned now, wanted to join the U.S., but U.S. won't take Texas, and so Texas starts flirting with our best friend, Great Britain. And of course, that makes us jealous. Polk wins the precedent, or wins the election. Tyler takes on Texas, and we annex Texas through joint resolution, which some people in Texas argue that was illegal, and so Texas is really this independent republic. So anyways, that is Texas, and of course, because we've taken Texas, Mexico is mad at us, and we are preparing for war with Mexico, and that's why we settle up with Great Britain. So 54th parallel is up here. We settle at the 49th parallel. Okay, right there, and we give them Vancouver Island. Okay, so what you have with Texas is there's the dispute in the boundaries. Okay, so Americans argue that the boundaries should be at the Rio Grande River. Okay, and Mexico is arguing it should be at the Nueces River. And so there's a border dispute. Polk actually sends troops down to the disputed border area, and Polk offers to pay for Texas, but Mexico refuses to even see our representatives. Polk says, okay, America's insulted. He's ready to ask for a declaration of war. Troops that are at the border get attacked, and now we have a probably more legitimate reason, well, quote unquote, legitimate reason for war, and that's the start of the Mexican-American War. Meanwhile, in California, there's gold discovered in California for all you football fans. 1849, right? San Francisco 49ers. This attracts prospectors from around the world. So from 1849 to 1860s, there's about 200,000 people from the East Coast, from Asia, from South America, all pouring into California looking to get rich. Okay. So the Mexican-American War. Okay, I just covered this. So Polk offers pay for Texas. Mexico doesn't want to hear it. We send troops down there. There are people opposed, and the war starts once the troops get attacked and we declare war. So there are reasons to the people that oppose the war, and they say it's imperialistic for us to take that territory. And again, so America's supposed to be this bastion of liberty, we would be no better than the old powers that were taking land and taking countries that didn't belong to them. What you have in California, you have the Bear Flag Revolution. So they actually revolt in California themselves, and they break away with the help of the American Navy. So just like all the wars, we don't really discuss the war. It's a pretty quick war. Mexico is really not in position to defend itself. And actually, the government is beginning to fall apart. We have to hurry up and sign a treaty before the government falls apart, and there would be no government to sign a treaty with. And so what ends the war is the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo. And Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo, we pay $15 million for New Mexico and Upper California, and we settle. We assume the debt obligations of the government of Mexico to Texas. Okay. So, quick war, 13,000 Americans killed, 11,000 died by disease, and now we have additional territory. Okay, that's some of the battles. What happens now, though, is what do we do about slavery in the new territories? Okay, that's the big question. And so the discussion actually really isn't up for debate. They're debating in Congress like how to pay for the war or how to pay, how to pay for all this land. And David Wilmot inserts this proviso in terms of the budget they're coming up with, that there will not be slavery in the new territories, and that opens up the floodgates. And so people are opposed. What are we going to do? There's some competing plans. Some people argued, why don't we just extend 3630? If you remember, that was the line drawn after the Missouri Compromise, or with Missouri Compromise. Let's just extend that. There are other folks like Lewis Cass, former governor of Michigan, says we should leave it up to popular sovereignty. So why don't we let the people in the areas decide? Okay. And then what you get from this is you get the emergence of a free soil party. And if you remember, so the abolition movement has been going on in this free soil party that they want to keep. So they don't want to end slavery, but they want to keep this new territory free soil. Okay. And they want to keep it free soil so free white labor can move there. They don't want competition from slaves. So there's the 3630 line. You can see the problem with the 3630 line is it would cut California in two. Okay, and that's not going to work because in California, again, we have the gold rush over there in California, so it has to be a free state because they have dictated that to have slaves in California, it's in their constitution. Slavery is outlawed in California. Because if you had slaves, you would unfairly compete with other gold miners in terms of prospecting. So California has to be a free state. So extending 3630 is not very viable in this case. In addition to that, you get the passing of the old guard. Okay, if you remember the old giants, Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, John C. Calhoun, they are, actually I think that's the next thing, they are passing from the scene. Okay, and what we get is this compromise of 1850. And so they are going to settle on this compromise. The old guard, though, is so sick they can't get this through, and you get the emergence of new leadership, in particular Stephen Douglas, senator from Illinois, who will actually help shepherd this through the Congress. Okay, he has to do it piece by piece. They can't do it all at once because there's different factions supporting different parts of it. So the Compromise of 1850, what it does is that California enters as a free state, so it throws off the balance. The Fugitive Slave Act has passed, and so even though there was a Fugitive Slave Act already on the books, runaway slaves are supposed to be returned to the South. Okay, and they can come up there and they can catch the runaway slaves. In addition to that, the slave trade is prohibited in D.C. Okay, and this is just connect the dots here. This is a long list of compromises. So if you remember going all the way back to the Constitutional Convention days, they had the 3/5 Compromise, the Slave Trade Compromise during that time, and it averted the country falling apart. We had the Missouri Compromise 1820, same thing, avoided the country falling apart over slavery. And here just seems to be a long line of another one, Compromise of 1850, we avert disaster and keep the country together. But unlike the other earlier compromises, this one is not as effective. And we will go from the Compromise of 1850 to civil war starting just 11 years later, 1861. Okay, so part of the debate or part of the question is like, well, what happens? And that puts us on the road to civil war. Okay, and so really throughout the 1850s, you should, my analogy I give in the classroom is that it's like a snowball that becomes an avalanche. Okay, and so what leads to that snowball becoming an avalanche? And so one of the things that contributes to that is this idea of, is the Fugitive Slave Act. Okay, so the Fugitive Slave Act, Northerners are supposed to return runaway slaves. And what happens is many northern states pass these personal liberty laws. In fact, some will turn to violence and they will break runaway slaves out of the jails. And this is the parting of ways between the North and South. And to the South will look at that as like the North is going back on its word. So they had agreed to the personal liberty laws, or they agreed to the Fugitive Slave Act, but here they are fighting against it. Okay, another thing that contributes to it is the Young America movement. Okay, the Young America movement is this idea that we should keep on expanding overseas. Okay, so if you believe in the idea of manifest destiny that God wanted us to expand to the to the Pacific, well, why would God want us to stop there? Why shouldn't we keep on going? And so the Ostend Manifesto was this idea to take Cuba. Okay, but it became quickly viewed as this slave owners plot. So one way to expand slavery is, well, if we take Cuba and make that a slave state, that's how slaves can get more power. Okay, or slave owning states can get more power. Okay, what you have though is this desire to build a transcontinental railroad. Okay, and so we want to build, connect the transportation network all across the continent. Gadsden purchases the last little sliver of land that we buy, so that we can build a southern railroad. So we can build a railroad along a southern route that would connect the country. The problem is, so that's a little Gadsden purchase right there. We're going to build a southern railroad network that goes there. Okay, I'm not sure why I have this map. Well, what we get is the Senator Douglas, Stephen Douglas, the one that helped shepherd the Compromise of 1850 through, wants to build a northern route. Now, the problem with building a northern route, the territory is not organized. And so to help organize it, he passes Kansas-Nebraska Act. So he splits the territory into two. Nebraska's not ready for slavery. It's too cold for slaves up there, or for growing cotton and slavery. But Kansas, however, is possible. And so he wants to organize Kansas into a territory so it can become a state, so they can build a railroad through it. Yeah. Again, there's no regard for Native Americans in this whole process. Oh, there you go. So again, he wants to build a transcontinental railroad, and Chicago, in his home state, would become a hub. And in Kansas, he would leave it up to popular sovereignty. So let the people decide whether they want to have slavery or not. And what that meant with the Kansas-Nebraska Act is the 3630 line is erased. Okay, and in the minds of many historians, this is the single biggest step to civil war. Okay, the free soil ideology, again, is this idea that they're not anti-slavery. They are free soil, and those aren't the same thing. So leave slavery where it's at in the South. Don't let it expand to the newly acquired territories. And again, they want to keep it free soil so that there can be free labor, provides for social mobility. Remember, people moved west to try to improve their life. Okay, and the idea of slavery limits free labor and limits, therefore, advancement and opportunities. Nope. The idea that, there you go, the South is backwards and stagnant. Okay, so what you have with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, there you go, slave power conspiracy, sorry, to make the whole country like the South. What you get with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, because it's popular sovereignty, they're going to let the people decide. Violence will break out. Okay, So there are pro-slavery folks that come across the border from Missouri. So Missouri doesn't want to be surrounded on all sides by free states. There are abolitionists that come in from New England. Okay, and those two will fight it out, start fighting. So these are border ruffians or border muffins. So Lawrence, Kansas is the headquarters for the anti-slavery. It gets sacked. They destroy buildings. They destroy the printing press. I think a few people die. In retaliation for that, John Brown will kill 5 pro-slavery settlers at Potawatomi Creek. Okay, him and his sons drag these guys out and hack them to death with swords, and he escapes before they exact revenge on him. And Franklin Pierce, who's president at this time, calls the anti-slavery folks traitors. And it's because the president takes sides, it really kind of it condones the violence committed by the pro-slavery folks. So what happened, this is the snowball becoming an avalanche again. Okay, so you have Bleeding Kansas. In Congress, you have Charles Sumner denounces the violence in Kansas. He gives a speech, Crime Against Kansas. He criticizes slavery. He criticizes those senators that defend slavery. Says it's this ugly harlot that nobody thinks is beautiful except for the Southerners, and they think it's the most beautiful thing ever. Insults Andrew Butler, a senator from South Carolina. And what the South does, again, it's chivalry, it defends the honor, if you remember that from the previous chapters. Andrew Butler's nephew, Preston Brooks, comes over from the house, and he doesn't even say a word, and he beats Sumner with a cane. And that's actually a picture of the cane that he hit him with. And I mean, beats him to a bloody pulp. It takes him 3 years. It takes Sumner 3 years to recover from the wounds inflicted on him. So Brooks resigns, gets reelected to his position. And actually, South Carolinians send him canes, hit him again, and things like that to honor him. And so again, this is the further splitting between the North and the South. Okay, Southern chivalry. I think this is critical of Preston Brooks' argument versus clubs. Okay, what happens after? Another thing that contributes to this is the political parties after the Kansas-Nebraska Act fall apart. So the Whig Party, if you remember the one that rose up in opposition to Andrew Jackson, it falls apart. And what happens is essentially the pro-slavery Whigs, pro-slavery Democrats, stay with the Democratic Party. Anyone that is anti-slavery, so anti-slavery Whigs, Free Soil, there's a Free Soil Party, there's a Liberty Party in New York, anti-slavery Democrats, they will go to the new Republican Party. Okay, and what happens is the parties aren't national parties anymore, they are regional parties. So Republicans mostly are from the North, Democrats are mostly from the South, which makes any kind of compromise that much more difficult. Okay, and one other important point I want to make here, the Republicans weren't abolitionists. So if you remember, like William Lloyd Garrison is like full emancipation, immediate emancipation, full equality now. And the Republicans weren't that. And they were more along the free soil platform. No slavery in the new territories. The West is supposed to be there for free white labor. But as we're rolling towards civil war, there is no national party to deal with the problem. Okay, political cartoon for the day. Crisis of 1850s. The pro-slavery argument. They argue that slavery is a positive good. Okay, as compared to the early days when it started, they viewed slavery as a necessary evil. We don't like it, but we have to have it. Now, and if you think about the changes we talked about in chapter 11, slavery now is a good thing, right? Without slavery, who knows what those people would be doing? They would be wandering around aimlessly. Slavery keeps them working hard and whatever else. It's a way for the Southerners to rationalize the existence there. They would argue the slaves can coexist. I mean, the different races can coexist, right? They get along peacefully because one group is the master and one group's the slaves. Doesn't make much sense to me, but that was their rationale. And then they would argue slavery is better than wage slavery in the North. Again, the argument that they feed, they clothe, they provide housing for their slaves, unlike in the North where They exploit the labor, and then if you get hurt, they just kind of cast you aside and hire somebody else. Okay, so what you get, President Buchanan, the Depression. So there's a depression in 1856. And what actually the funny part is about Buchanan is that what gets him elected is that he wasn't in the country when Kansas, Nebraska was falling apart. And so Buchanan himself is pretty weak, pretty meek. But there's a depression that goes on, and what happens is this depression will lead to a panic in 1857. And the South is not really affected by it. Okay, the North is affected by it, and the South begins to think like, do we really need the North? Okay, so there's a deadlock over Kansas. So Kansas is ready to join the Union, or join the country. I guess not join the Union, join the country. However, the pro-slavery folks in Kansas draft this LeCompton Constitution. It's a fraudulent constitution. The other side wasn't there to debate the Constitution. They send it to Washington. And what happens when it's sent to Washington is that the Southerners bully Buchanan. Like, you support this or we're going to secede. And Buchanan gives in to him. And fortunately, Stephen Douglas, is able to shoot down this Lecompton Constitution. But the lesson has been learned for the Southerners that if they threaten secession, they can get their way. 1857, we have Dred Scott versus Sanford. I think you guys probably learned about this in middle school. Dred Scott's a slave. He goes with to the north with his master. Sue's saying he is free because he was on free soil. Case goes to Supreme Court. And at this point, this Supreme Court, usually what they do is there's a winning side and a losing side. And one person from the winning side will write a opinion that explains what their reasoning was. Somebody on the losing side will do the same. Here, the Supreme Court, everybody wrote their own opinion. And the big takeaway from the Supreme Court decision here in Dred Scott is that slaves don't have the right to sue because they are not citizens. They don't have the right to sue. And they could have stopped right there, but they went on to say, even if they could sue, the Missouri Compromise, the one that banned slavery above 3630, is unconstitutional. Okay. And so seemingly the South is won. There's nothing you can do to ban slavery. And for the North, there is nothing else you can do. The Supreme Court, remember, the Supreme Court has the final say on things. The Supreme Court has spoken. It seems to be an end game. Oops. Oh, that's LeCompton. Should have cut out the other slide. But there you go. We already just talked about this. Okay, 1858 again. So we started in 1850. Here we are, 1858. Lincoln-Douglas debates. And so Abraham Lincoln is debating Stephen Douglas for the Senate seat, not running for president yet, for the Senate seat. And they're trying to paint each other in the extremes. And so Douglas is trying to make Lincoln look like an abolitionist. Lincoln is trying to make Douglas look like a pro-slavery guy, even though he's not. He says slavery, the states should decide that popular sovereignty idea, not citizens. Lincoln is more of a free soiler. He's a Republican, but remember, they're more of a free soil ideology. Okay, it's wrong, but there's no solution. We should give them some basic rights. And what happens is they have like these debates all across Illinois. And at one point, Lincoln traps Buchanan, saying, "Hey, Dred Scott says you can't ban slavery. You say it's up to popular sovereignty, where they can ban it if they want. How do you make those two work?" And Buchanan says, he kind of weasels his way out of it. He says, if you don't want to have slavery, then you just don't pass any laws to support it. It's like you can have speeding laws, but if there's no tickets being written, then it really doesn't matter. And it got him out of the question, but now the Southerners lose trust in Stephen Douglas. Okay, they look like it looks like Stephen Douglas, might ban slavery if he had the chance when he's running for president. Okay. John Brown's raid here. So John Brown, this is the John Brown from Pottawatomie Creek in Kansas that kills the 5 pro-slavery settlers. Him and his son's he's convinced that the only way you're going to end slavery is it has to be washed away with blood. That's what he says in his last statement here. So how do you do that? Well, he's going to start a slave revolt at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. And Harper's Ferry is a munitions depot. That's where the government keeps some of its weapons. Tries to start a slave revolt. They actually get a hold of the depot, but no slave. He thought slaves would come out and join them in the revolt. That fails. His sons are killed. He's with his sons. His sons are killed. Brown's hung for treason, and his supporters want him to claim that he temporarily gone insane, lost his mind, and Brown refuses to, and he becomes a martyr for the cause, saying, "I knew darn well what I was doing, because the sins of slavery can only be washed away with blood." And it's just another polarizing event, in this case figure. The South believes that the Republicans must have helped him. Frederick Douglass must have helped him. He couldn't have done this by himself. And they think this is what the North will resort to. After Dred Scott, the North is going to start resorting to violence to try to overturn slavery. Okay, so cartoon of John Brown. Okay, so the election of 1860, what happens is the Democrats are divided. Again, Southern Democrats don't trust Stephen Douglas, so they split off and they nominate their own candidate, John Breckinridge. Okay. What happens is Lincoln gets the Republican nomination. It's funny, even though he wasn't the favorite. I think he was like third favorite, fourth favorite, maybe even in the Republican Party. But what happens though is he was everybody else's number two. He was everybody else's number two choice. So if they couldn't get their top candidate, they would rather have Lincoln. Okay, so that's how he wins the nomination. He wins the presidency, even though he doesn't get, you can see he gets 39.9% of the popular vote. Not a single Southern state votes for Lincoln. Okay, and it's after Lincoln, when he wins the electoral votes, not the popular vote. After Lincoln's election, okay, the South doesn't secede yet. And what happens is, from the North's viewpoint, they think the South is bluffing. So talk of secession, they're not really going to do it. From the South's vantage point, the North doesn't have the will to resist secession. If you remember how squishy Buchanan was, Lincoln, and Buchanan's still president. So Lincoln is elected. He's not president yet. Okay, and he just goes home back to Illinois. Buchanan's still president. And so they don't think the North will have the will to resist. South Carolina secedes, and quickly followed by 6 other states. So if you remember the mistake they made during the nullification crisis, that they stood alone. And Buchanan says, what am I supposed to do? Okay, he doesn't have the legal authority to prevent secession, so he kind of lets it happen. What about President Lincoln, President-elect Lincoln? What does he do? He goes home to grow a beard. So, hope you enjoyed the lecture. Don't forget to buy the merch, and we will see you next time.